So in this video, I'm going to talk about the different explorers that have come to Canada and sort of the beginning of the relationship between European explorers and the First Nations groups. So John Cabot, or Giovanni Caboto, was the first one that I'm going to talk about today. So England had a lot of trading routes in Europe and in Asia that went over land, but they wanted a sea route to China, and they wanted to be able to sail to China and sort of traveling by land because it would hopefully be more efficient and faster and slightly easier. So Cabot was given what's called letters patent, which gave him the right to seek out lands to take from the heathens. So this was basically just like a letter from the king that said, you can go and you can take this land. So in 1497, a voyage with a small crew went towards what they thought would be China and found what they called Newfoundland. And so much cod. There was cod everywhere. And at this point, relationship between them and First Nations were pretty good. It's not bad. And by the way, I called him Giovanni Caboto in the beginning because he was actually Italian, but hired by the English. Jacques Cartier. So in 1534, France sent Jacques Cartier to look for the Northwest Passage to Asia. So at this point, they knew that there was a big landmass in their way of going from Western Europe to China. So they thought, oh, we'll look for a way to get there through the Arctic. They claimed the something St. Lawrence. I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what that G stands for. But they claimed the St. Lawrence River for France and kidnapped this chief's sons and returned to France. In 1535, they further explored the St. Lawrence River. They went further upstream, aka inland. They ignored Donnaconna's advice and kept going further upstream. So he said, don't do it, guys, and he just kept going. So you can see here, this is the route that he took. So it's interesting to know that he was trying to find an Arctic, like north, well, I guess they didn't know it would be Arctic, but a way above all this landmass to get to China. Little did they know, Canada is huge. So they came in here, Newfoundland, which they knew was there, came up, found a way to get in. And they ended up exploring the Gulf of St. Lawrence. That's what that G stands for. And then this is the next trip. So they knew that this little pass was here. They went up the St. Lawrence and back to France. So they stayed in Hochelaga, aka Montreal, over the winter, the second time. At this point, the relationship between the French and the Haudenosaunee had deteriorated. It wasn't so good as it used to be. And the winter was colder than the French expected. 25 sailors died of scurvy. So scurvy is when you don't have enough vitamin C and your gums rot, and it's super nasty. And this is part of what Donnacona would have warned people about, and that's why he said, or part of why he said, don't go further up the St. Lawrence. You guys aren't prepared for it. France still approved a third trip by Cartier, but again, a lot of people died, and this first effort to colonize Canada failed. The beginning of the fur trade, so though there wasn't necessarily a colony that worked out really well, there was still trade. So the Europeans would come to visit, and these visits were there to raise money for home and not really to open up new areas for settlement. So their goal at this point wasn't really to get a colony anyways. They just wanted to make money. Europeans were making pretty good money fishing, but more of the profits lay in furs, so wool, marten, lynx, and then huge profits were there because the First Nations wanted knives and hatchets and pots and pans and things like that, which were cheap for the Europeans to bring over. In Europe, furs were of much greater value than the items given to the First Nations. So we have this bit of history where the Europeans were coming to Canada and doing lots of trading, but not really staying, besides that one time that they tried. But Samuel de Champlain was given a monopoly on the fur trade in return for establishing a French colony. So he was basically, the French government said, you get to do all of the fur trading for France if you establish a colony for us. So in 1605, Port Royal in Nova Scotia was started. Not a huge success. Probably similar reasons as to why the first thing didn't work. So 2 years later, the post disbanded. Some people stayed to farm, and they formed Acadia. So I think that's right around there. So Nova Scotia. Another year later, they established a new post, now Quebec City. So somewhere along here. This is Champlain's route. So you can see he came in. Up top is where Cartier came at first. So here's Champlain's route. He comes here. There's Port Royal. Down to Boston and back out. And that's a painting depicting the beginnings of this fort. So alliances. Champlain needed a reliable source of furs to make a profit. So he mostly dealt with the Algonquin and the Innu, then known as the Montagnais. I don't know. And they basically said, you guys only deal with us, the French, and we'll have a good relationship. In return, the French would be allies against the Haudenosaunee. So they would work with the Algonquin against the Haudenosaunee if the Haudenosaunee attacked. And I think that's the Iroquois. Champlain also formed an alliance with the Wendat, aka the Huron, to use their trade connections. This is just a little bit about the beaver pelt hats. So this is really what started the fur trade in a really big way from Canada to Europe. Beaver felt hats were all the rage in Europe at the time, and there weren't a lot of beavers left in Europe. I believe they were being hunted. So anyways, there was a lot in Canada. But one of the funny things about it, if you guys have seen Alice in Wonderland, you have the Mad Hatter. People who made hats really did go mad because one of the additives to help make the fur do its thing and stick together was mercury, and you have enough of that in your head and you go a little crazy. And you guys can ignore that. Thank you for listening.